Better health, better care, lower cost. Everyone's talking about healthcare, but how much do you know? Better Health is brought to you in part by Sleep Better Northwest. Explore the healthcare system and listen to experts with your host, Lani Madsen, here on Better Health.
Okay, welcome to Better Health, and today I have a special guest, a 1953 graduate from the Deaconess School of Nursing, Fran Bennett Wicht. She was a professor at Spokane Community College from 1968 to 1994, and welcome, Fran.
Thank you.
Glad you could join me. And one of the things that, as the daughter of a history teacher, I've always been interested in the context and understanding the history behind things. And when it comes to healthcare, there's a lot that has changed, and I think we forget how much has changed. And so, Fran, you've brought some of the items today that are obsolete. And,
yes. And one of the things that I wish I could have brought was a glass syringe. The glass syringes were reused. They came up to us wrapped in gauze, and you had to match the number on the syringe with the number on the barrel, or they wouldn't work. And then you had to add a needle. So we had to be very careful, and we gave penicillin shots every 4 hours. So we used a lot of glass syringes. And I just looked on eBay, and somebody was trying to sell one for $25. So I wish I had one.
So no disposables is one of the obsolete things. And I'm actually modeling one of the other obsolete things. You don't see nurses wearing hats like this anymore. All the hair off the collar.
No, you never do.
I'm gonna set it down there. This one had a W on the side to indicate Whitworth, because the Deaconess School of Nursing was affiliated with Whitworth.
So when I married a man with the last name of W, people asked me how do I get my initial on my cap.
I know, and caps used to tell, it was a symbol of what school. Every school had a different style of cap.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Some were very frivolous.
So what is that thing that looks like it's going to balance an egg on it?
Well, this is a stethoscope, a fetoscope that was used in the 1970s some places in the world to listen to the baby's heart.
May still be using it some places as a very low-tech.
Well, they may be if they don't have anything better.
Yeah.
And another thing that we used to use, we didn't have anything disposable. So this was our pill tray, and this was for liquid medications. And you could just have a whole tray of these, or you might have this if the person was getting something liquid.
And all glass.
All glass or all metal.
Okay.
And all the utensils and things were metal. The only thing I have left that's metal is this is an enema bucket. And one of the things we were told when we entered training, that if we needed help when we were in a room, we were to take the metal emesis basin and throw it out into the hall, and somebody would come immediately. Well, it would also work if this was empty and you threw this out into the hall. But that wouldn't work nowadays. They have plastic utensils, and they have rugs on the floors, so you wouldn't be getting any help at all.
That's true. One of the things that we forget is how we've come to rely on things that are disposable.
Yes.
And when you graduated from Deaconess, there were no men in your class.
There was one man.
One man in your class. Mm-hmm. That's one of the reasons I know that caps have gone away. Is it?
Yes, the men kind of didn't want to wear caps.
I didn't want to wear the caps. But that's certainly changed from later on when you were teaching at community college. There were
definitely.
It's become much more of a draw for both men and women into nursing. But your first job was a little different. You did not first work in Spokane. Other than the fact that nursing students worked at the hospital, you worked in the territory of Hawaii. Can you tell us a little bit about that experience?
Well, after my work at Deaconess in the labor and delivery rooms to make enough money to go to Hawaii.
Okay.
And that was an interesting place to work because every pregnant woman that came in got put on a marble slab, thoroughly washed, and all her pubic hairs shaved, and the doctor would complain if there were any left. It was
don't think
ridiculous.
They do that anymore.
No, they don't do that anymore. And another thing that we had to do was wash the rubber gloves, because rubber gloves were reused and sterilized. So we hung them on a rack that we had that had all these fingers, looked like somebody was pointing fingers at you, until they were dry and we could send them down to be sterilized. Times have really changed.
Oh, okay, so you worked in labor and delivery, and that earned your passage to Hawaii.
Yes.
Where you founded, I believe you had said once that you and your friends had decided there was a nursing shortage. I guess there's always a nursing shortage in Hawaii, and you took off for the island. So what did you find there?
Our first jobs were specializing in military people who had infantile paralysis, polio, and they were in iron lungs. And I had never taken care of anyone in an iron lung before, but we managed, and I think my friend and I think both of our patients died when they got shipped to the mainland, we heard. So then I got a job at the Queen's Hospital, and the Queen's Hospital was established by King Kamehameha and his wife, Queen Emma, in 1867, I believe, because there were too many foreigners coming, Europeans coming to Hawaii and giving them diseases. And so the death rate among the Hawaiians was so bad that they thought they needed to do something or there'd be no Hawaiians left.
So they established the hospital, and it had a long history of charity care, I believe.
Well, I worked in a charity ward. I worked nights. There were just 2 nurses for our 42-bed ward. So we each had 20 patients or so. And these were the patients, for instance, one night we got 2 on stretchers practically at the same time, and it turns out they had been fighting. There was a lot of knife fighting. And we put them in separate rooms, but those rooms are connected by a bathroom. So we were concerned that they might, when they got a little better, they might meet each other again. But we always had, in that case, we had a large Hawaiian policeman that sat in the hall, and I don't know whether he was protecting us or protecting the men.
Okay. So after the Queen's Hospital, I think you came back to the mainland, and you worked some back here in Spokane.
I did, but I had some more interesting experiences in Hawaii. I had a man who broke his tibia, and he was going to have surgery the next day, and he disappeared during the night. Turns out he climbed out the window.
With a broken tibia?
We were on a ground floor, and he needed to move his car or he'd get a parking ticket. So he returned. So I hope he had a strong fibula because his tibia was broken. And another night, they told me I'd be lucky if I could keep this patient alive through the night. They were bleeding. They were an alcoholic. When I went in to see him, he was so pale and also slightly yellow. He had cirrhosis of the liver, and I had to take his vital signs every hour, and his sheets looked like a barber pole with striped red and white. And about all I could do is take his vitals and empty the blood out of his emesis basin. And I called the intern, and the intern came, and the advice he gave me was to take his blood pressure every 15 minutes, which didn't really help when you have 20 patients and then you have to take his blood pressure every 15 minutes. He didn't make it through the night.
I think one of the other things we take for granted is the monitoring devices that we have now, instead of nurses being told to take vitals every 15 minutes.
Oh, yes. The glass thermometers with mercury in them. Have you seen one of those lately?
Not in a long time.
No, and when they would break, the nurses would sometimes play with that mercury, which is not a good idea.
No.
Now we have things that can take your blood pressure, take your pulse, take your
oxygen
all kinds
saturation.
Of things.
Yeah, they can monitor all sorts of things.
They're all automated.
And no more glass breaking all over the terrazzo floors.
We had glass pitchers, glass water glasses, and straws with a bend in them that were glass. And the patients were always knocking those onto the terrazzo floor, and we had to scrape up the glass without hurting anybody. That was no fun. So now everything's plastic and disposable. Even the wash basins were metal.
So where did that tradition of the wards come from? I think you had traced that back to Florence Nightingale.
Well, Florence Nightingale advocated 30 and 40 bed wards. And there are some advantages to the wards. The patients can all see that you're in there, that you're busy, and if they're desperate, they can call on you. But if they're in private rooms, some people get kind of worried when they don't see anybody, and so there's too many lights going on.
At the same, yeah. Yeah, I know one of the things that some people are surprised to find out is that in the United States right now you could not build a ward. In fact, all rooms are supposed to be private rooms, but that does have an impact on the nurses because you can't as easily monitor your patients.
And on the patients. The patients in a ward, the last time I had a child, I was in a 7-bed ward, and the ladies were all very friendly, and we chatted, and you're not all by yourself.
Yeah, you're not quite as alone. Yes, that is an advantage.
And I have seen wards in other countries that were for the emergency room patients. So you go in the emergency room, and there's 12 beds. You can see everybody. Everybody can see everybody else.
You kind of know what's going on and why you're not getting any attention right then, because obviously somebody else needs it more than you do. Okay, well, let's take a quick break here, and we will come back and talk a little bit more about how things advanced from the 50s.
Hi, this is Kurt Stockwell with Well Dressed Walrus. We are a local website design and development company here in Spokane. What we do is build beautiful, usable websites for local businesses. A website needs to be beautiful, it needs to be usable for your users, your customers, and yourself. Contact us anytime. We'd love to talk with you about your online marketing.
The economy is getting stronger. Banks are lending again, and interest rates are at historic lows. Now is a great time to buy your dream home. The caring and knowledgeable professionals at Homes for You have been helping people just like you for over 20 years. They take the time to listen to what you want and will help you find just the right home in Washington or Idaho. Real estate is what we do at Homes for You, 928-5782, or visit online at homes4uspokane.com.
Okay, well, we were just visiting a bit about when the first disposable syringes came in, and now we do trade outs for syringes with addicts, which is a whole other problem. But when did the first disposables come in?
Apparently they were developed in New Zealand first, which is kind of strange. In 1954, which is after I graduated from training, but they weren't. There wasn't a U.S. patent for them until 1974, which is just amazing to me.
That seems awfully late for that change to have happened.
So I wonder if some came in before the patent. But anyway, that's what happened.
Well, there's other kinds of technology that have changed, and one of those is communication. And you had mentioned that you had instructions of what you had to report to the Department of Health and how.
The Washington State Department of Health. They wanted these diseases sent to them, reported immediately by telephone or telegraph. So you know this is old. We don't even have telegraph anymore. They wanted botulism, plague, cholera, smallpox, and typhus fever. And I've never seen any of those. Later they added leprosy, and I have had a patient with leprosy.
I think that list would be completely different if I looked it up on the website today.
I think it would. And in 1979, the World Health Organization declared there was no more smallpox in the world.
And then I've just read in the last month or so that there's a resurgence of some kind of a pox. So we have to be careful about those.
And here in Spokane, they just had some kind of an exercise.
An exercise for Ebola.
Yes.
Yes.
And how to treat a patient.
Just to be careful. And
so those things are not gone.
They're not gone. So moving on to the nursing education, when you started in 1968, you had students who were, let's see, did your students still wear caps, or we'd gotten past that at that point?
Oh no, we the first class we had at SCC was 1970, and we let them design their own cap.
Oh.
So that was one of their exercises.
Okay.
And another thing that happened with that first class involved this thing. They were supposed to show in nursing arts that they could fill this up for an enema and take it to the bedside. So I had one student who filled it up by keeping her finger over this.
Oh, the outlet hole?
Yes. And then I thought, what is she going to do with that? She carefully took it to the bedside, set it down, got her rubber thing she had to put on it, and put it on with hardly a drop. I just was amazed. Well, you can't flunk somebody like that.
Okay. She was very artful. So when you had students, what was the general curriculum? How did the curriculum kind of change from those early students through the 20 years? Were there some things that changed a great deal and some things that didn't?
I think, I don't know what they know about drugs now, but I know they go around with practically an encyclopedia of drugs in their pockets. Mm-hmm. And we had to have them know things about their drugs. All the precautions, the usual dosages and all that, they had to know that.
Oh, instead of having it as a reference
Well, but
material.
they don't do that anymore.
I imagine not. There's a whole lot of the pharmacopoeia, the list has gotten so much larger.
And another thing that's changed is the patients used to have a bell. Sometimes it was actually a mechanical bell to call for a nurse. But now they have much fancier devices where they can talk to the nurses at the nurses' station or talk to their nurse, and the nurses can talk between each other with their little pocket devices, and big changes there.
Yeah. So what's some advice that you would give to someone who's interested in nursing as a career, and maybe a little bit about, I know a little bit about how you chose nursing as a career, and it had more to do with access to education, but that's a bit of an interesting story, and then maybe some advice to others who are considering nursing.
Well, that's what I could afford at the time, and so I went into it. But it's a great occupation, and there are so many things that you can do. It's really varied, so you can make your own course. And now I would recommend that you get your bachelor's degree, and nurses are getting their doctorate degrees, and it's just completely changed. And the uniform behind you is our graduation uniform. It's cotton. It has to be washed. It has to be ironed and starched. And the buttons all come off with little hooks, and you have to take the buttons off every time you wash them. Not a good idea.
Yeah, I think we have one of those things that we've forgotten about how far we've come. So the specialties have made a big difference. I know your specialty in teaching was obstetrics.
And pediatrics.
And there are, what were some of the things that you saw change during the course of your career and how you would take care of patients? Besides, we already talked a little bit about the obstetric patients. What about the pediatric patients?
The pediatric patients, we used to go visit the schools for the, well, they didn't call it the school for the blind, and the school for the deaf. And all those have been melded now, and they go to the public schools.
There's more mainstreaming, that's true.
We wouldn't be going to visit different places like that.
One of your rotations was to, as a student, was to Western State Hospital, I think, and to
Northern State Hospital.
Northern State Hospital,
which is not around anymore.
Okay, not around anymore. But do your students do those same kinds of rotations when they were going through school?
They went to Eastern State Hospital.
Okay,
well, they used to go out to rural hospitals. We had a rural hospital experience for them.
And I think that's something that the nursing school, the WSU's nursing school is still doing, and Gonzaga's, is they're trying to get out into the rural areas.
I would certainly hope so. At the Lincoln Hospital, I think they said our students could stay in the basement someplace. I don't know what's in the basement.
There was an apartment in the basement.
Okay.
It's not there anymore, but there was an apartment.
But some of them elected to go back to Spokane because it was so close.
So what are some things that that you see still characterize nursing as opposed to doctoring in the education?
one of the interesting things, and I thought I brought my pins, but when we started in nursing, they gave us pins, and mine said Miss F. Bennett. So people would address me, the patients, as Miss Bennett. Now, when you see people, they're all Jody or Claire or something.
They're all first names, yeah.
The only people that have a last name are the doctors. They're still usually Dr. something. But my last name tag said Mrs. Fran Wicht. So I was still Mrs. Wicht.
So it was still more formal.
Yes. Not anymore.
Now the informality has entered in. Yeah.
And that's kind of sad in a way.
Do you think that's harder on patients to not feel that there's some
with
authority there, or
with some of the new first names that have come out? Yes.
Okay, well that could be a problem with last names too. So there's two items on the desk here that we know we didn't really talk about, and that's these the lamps, and it kind of goes back to the origins of nursing as a profession.
And these were donated by a pharmaceutical company that I won't name, and they say on them, dedicated to the nurse and her devoted care to human welfare. That's written on here. So we used these when we went through our capping ceremony. And here's a picture of right after our capping ceremony.
Do you have that picture you could put up of the first one with the nurses, the whole group of nurses? The other one. That's a group. There we go. This is after capping. And I don't think I've seen a uniform like that in the hospital in my lifetime. It's really changed.
Those uniforms also had buttons that you had to take off. They had the little things behind them. And we had to put those all together. We must have had 12.5 buttons to put together before we could go to work. It's just ridiculous.
Well, one of the things that, besides simplifying uniforms, we've sort of complicated healthcare, and I wanted to kind of bring this to a close. We started with how training has changed so much from the 50s, and now we're over 50 years later, and we've got a whole lot more specialties. Instead of the nurse having to be a generalist in everything, the nurses are specialized, the doctors are specialized. We have all these subspecialties that have come in. One of the things that you had mentioned was just the number of doctors. Nobody has just one doctor anymore. And I mean, you're fortunate you just have 3. But I know I have friends who are dealing with maybe half a dozen, all trying to figure out what's going on. What are some things that you would suggest to people who, as they're dealing with their multiple doctors? You've been an advocate for yourself and an advocate for others. How would you encourage people to be an advocate?
Well, they do have to be an advocate, or they have to take someone with them to help them understand what's going on. I always suggest when people are going to the doctor that they do have someone with them, because they're usually agitated and they don't always hear everything.
That's true. And I would like to acknowledge at this point that this is my mom, and so she has always been my advocate. I've been very fortunate I've had a couple of times where I had, it's been a number of years now where I've had surgery, but I've had my mom be my advocate, and usually there was somebody on duty who was one of your students, and they all straightened up a little when their professor was sitting in the room waiting to see how they were taking care of their patient. So I want to thank you for coming today and bringing a few things to let us all remember just how far we've come. And I think it's a good reminder as we look at healthcare in the future is to think about how far we're going to go. Change will be the only constant. So thank you for your time today.
You're welcome.
Better Health with Lani Madsen is produced in Spokane, Washington by SpokaneTalksOnline.com, which is solely responsible for its content. Better Health is brought to you in part by Sleep Better Northwest. Ask Lani a question, recommend a guest or topic, and hear this program again online anytime. at SpokaneTalksOnline.com. Cheers to better health, and thanks for listening.